All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Housing will be here at 2 o'clock, so we're going to shuffle some things around. Josh, you're going to be taking the lead on the other two items that we have left. Which one would you like to go with first? Would that be the Code of Ethics or Intellectual Property Use Manual?
We can start with the Code of Ethics.
Okay, let's get started.
To start, there are some proposed amendments to Chapter 96 and Chapter 14 to incorporate some of the language in the Code of Ethics, so I'll go over those first before we go through the Code of Ethics and the Administrative Hearing Code that's being proposed along with the Code of Ethics. For Chapter 96, one of the proposed changes in that code is adding a definition for virtual appearance, which shall mean any technology that allows a person to appear at a meeting in a manner other than in person. This is incorporated into Chapter 96, 14, and the proposed ethics code. This is so we have consistent language for virtually appearing for meetings, and the language we have does not become outdated as technology evolves. And the other proposed change for Chapter 96 is for closed session, adding some language that was previously proposed in the Code of Ethics is that a person appearing for a meeting virtually shall appear in an area in which they cannot be overheard by others during closed sessions.
I have a question. So I assume that means that you can't, the board member can't be in a room and have their attack dog sitting right next to them, taking down notes, and so does that cover that? They have to be solely, because if we're in a closed session, the board member's entitled to be in a closed session, not their attack dog.
Correct.
Okay.
And those are the only two proposed changes in Chapter 96. Are there any questions on those language changes?
Any questions so far? No questions so far, Josh.
I hope you're getting a tip.
Yeah, I didn't even buy the dang thing. Who's getting what?
I can
For Chapter 14, the proposed changes include adding a definition for personal interest. Previously, personal interest was not defined, so it defines it as when an individual's personal interests, family, friendship, financial, or social factors could compromise his or her judgment, decisions, or actions. A personal interest does not exist if the effect on a person is no greater than the effect on the general public. And then it is adding a definition for virtual appearance into Chapter 14, so it's consistent across all of the codes. Then for 14109, the proposed language change would be to remove the prohibition on telephone voting and just make it proxy voting is not permitted, and then changing the language from video conferencing to virtual appearance. And the reason for removing telephone voting is because virtual appearance kind of incorporates any type of technology people could use to appear and vote at a meeting, and it kind of cancels each other out. And those are the only proposed changes to Chapter 14 at this time. Are there any questions on the proposed language for Chapter 14?
No questions, Josh.
For the latest version of the draft of the Code of Ethics, since it has been a while since we have discussed this, I will go through each section and then pause for questions after each section. (103.101) Purpose and Authority. It is the purpose of this chapter to set forth ethical standards of conduct to guide all current and former members of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians Board of Directors and all currently appointed and former Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indian Committee members, and to provide effective means for enforcement thereof. High moral and ethical standards among the directors and committee members are essential to promote and protect the integrity of the tribal government. Therefore, a code of ethics is necessary in order to ensure officials act in the best interest of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians and not their personal interests. This code of ethics is also necessary for directors and committee members to avoid conflicts of interest, to improve standards of tribal service, and to promote and strengthen the faith and confidence of the members in the tribe and the integrity, security, and accountability of their government. It is further declared and acknowledged that directors and committee members enjoy all rights and privileges of membership of the Sioux tribe, in particular those contained in the Constitution. Are there any questions on the language in section 101?
Any questions on this area, guys? No questions so far, Josh.
Section 103.103 definitions. Committee shall mean any entity created and owned by the tribe for economic or governmental purposes, and any entity which is controlled by the Board of Directors. For purposes of this chapter, an entity shall be deemed to be controlled by the Board of Directors if a majority of the persons serving on the body which governs the entity are chosen by the Board of Directors or are required to be members of the Board of Directors. Entities governed by this chapter include, but are not limited to, the Cultural Committee, Audit Committee, Broadband Utility Authority, Child Welfare Committee, Conservation Committee, Elder Advisory Committee, Elder Subcommittee, Election Commission, Food Sovereignty Committee, Gaming Authority, Gaming Commission, Head Start Advisory, Health Board Committee, Higher Education Committee, Housing Authority, JKL Fiduciary Committee, Sioux Tribe Inc. Board of Directors, Special Needs/Enrollment Committee, Tax Committee, Utility Authority, and Cemetery Committees. A committee member shall mean any person currently or formerly serving on a committee. Board of Directors shall mean the governing body of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. Director, as used in this chapter, shall mean a person who is or was a duly elected member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians Board of Directors. Confidential information shall mean any information relating to business, personal matters, litigation, legislative, and administrative matters, contracts, finances, investigations, and any other information, whether oral or and proprietary or not, which has not been designated by the Board of Directors as being otherwise available to all tribal members or the public at large, or as being otherwise a matter of general or public knowledge. Conflict of interest shall mean personal interest as defined in Tribal Code Chapter 14, 105, Section 6, which means when an individual's personal interest, family, friendship, financial, or social factors could compromise his or her judgment, decisions, or actions. A personal interest does not exist if the effect on a person is no greater than the effect on the general public. Tribe shall mean the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians and any of its wholly owned governmental or business instrumentalities. And virtual appearance shall mean any technology that allows a person to appear at a meeting in a matter other than person.
Do you think it would be a good idea to add back to committees a V, that is, any additional committees as created by the Travel Board of Directors?
Yeah, that language could be added. The catch-all there is just the not limited to before the list, so like it does give the ability to enforce it on other committees that aren't listed.
Okay.
Okay, Mike?
Do we give any onboarding on committee members? Like our committee member is going to know that they fall under the code of ethics then? So that might be something that we may want to look into, is some kind of onboarding, because if someone gets appointed on a committee, they're not going to know this tribal law code of ethic applies to them. So we may want to get maybe some kind of packet together for any new member on a committee. Here's your packet, code of ethics applies to you. And is conflict of interest meant to be numbered and put in that with the rest of those?
Yes, the number just didn't carry over in the editing.
Okay, Aaron?
That'd be nice.
Yeah, well, maybe for implementation, we have a training session and a sign-off, because, you know, what I don't want somebody to say later that, well, I didn't know I couldn't share his finances during the campaign. I didn't know that was not allowed, to leave copies of it laying around. A signature will verify that they understand and will comply.
Agreed.
(103.201) Conflicts of interest. No director or committee member shall use or attempt to use an official or apparent authority of their office which places or could reasonably be perceived as placing their private gain before those of the tribe whose paramount interests their office is intended to serve.
Aaron?
Apparent authority, I think, is too broad. I think maybe we need a definition for that then, because that could include anything. That shouldn't be left to interpretation.
Okay.
Whether or not specifically prohibited herein, a director or committee member shall avoid any action which could result in or create an appearance of using public office for private gain, giving preferential treatment to any special interest, organization, or person or family, impeding or interfering with governmental or managerial efficiency or economy, losing or compromising independence or impartiality of action, making a governmental decision outside of official channels and or procedures, or adversely affecting the confidence of the members of the tribe and the integrity of the government and administration of the Sioux tribe. Pursuant to Tribal Code 14.110, the board will determine by a positive majority if a director has a personal interest in a manner. Are there any questions on this section?
Aaron?
So my only concern about this, because I know our history, and we're individually elected by the constituents. And it could be that an individual board member serving the interest of their constituents while there's no conflict could be found in conflict by a majority of the board who disagree with the actions of the individual board member. So then a majority rule, like a mob, basically, can run roughshod and quiet a individual for expressing their freedom of speech, which is a U.S. constitutional right, which we are obligated to uphold. I just don't, I support the general notion of an ethics code because while we've had a misapplication of it, in some cases that have led to people's removals, that's why it was created in 1993 to remove Bev Lewis. We need something, but what we don't need is we don't need a majority of the board to be able to shut up an independent board member. So I'm a little concerned about standards of proof, some kind of threshold. Without that, because I thought that this was leading to an administrative board that would make, or a panel that would make the decision. I'm not comfortable with the majority of the board making the decision, so.
And part of the reason why the positive majority was left in for conflicts of interest, so there is, if an action is voted on and then months later it's determined someone voted on it and there was a conflict of interest, it isn't policing backwards that conflict of interest. That conflict of interest is resolved at the time the matter is voted on. So it makes it more efficient and not as much trying to police past actions on votes and trying to see how to approach that.
So, okay, hold on. Okay, so this is limited to the conflict of interest then.
Yes, it does not apply to
Okay.
any of the other, just the conflict of interest. So that is,
Well, okay, I still think we need something that's a little more detailed that can guide the board on what a conflict of interest is. And I'm not going to go through the detail, but I mean, this board has voted on, not this board, but previous boards have voted on things where there was a personal relationship between individuals for officer elections. There's no other way to explain that other than a conflict of interest. And there was an attempt to call it into conflict, but a majority of the board, playing the politics and lining up, said no, it wasn't a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest has been attempted to be called on the board in the past for immediate family members. And because of the politics of the board aligning with that board member who had an immediate conflict, because they have an immediate family member, voted not to make it a conflict. So there needs to be some kind of a guidance for the board. We can't leave it to common sense because our politics are so volatile sometimes that we may call this person in conflict one time, and on the exact same sort of standard, this person would not be called in conflict. So I support, you know that I support this because I supported this yesterday, calling conflict. And so anyway, I just think that this doesn't do it by itself. I don't want to be in a position where if you have a board member that has been consistently opposed to your positions on the board, that you then choose to punish that board member and you vote a conflict, or I don't know, somebody's enriching somebody else somehow and you don't vote on a conflict. So that itself would be a conflict. But anyway, okay.
Tyler?
Well, I mean, I want to follow up on what he said there. I'm kind of concerned about this section too, is like, I agree in conflict of interest. I don't agree in us, for a multitude of reasons, the board making the decision of what's a conflict, because it's not just going, this code of ethics, if it gets passed, it's not just going to be voted on in a meeting to silence them at a meeting. I think it can be used to silence board members in other ways as well. I would prefer to codify the courts into this somehow, or focus on constitutional amendments of separation of powers first. I still don't agree with us disciplining each other. I don't know how else to say it. You know, I've said it before. I don't understand why we can't at least codify something for the court system until we get to the point of constitutional amendments. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Josh?
so in this current draft, that does give the court the authority to review any complaints filed on this, and those are automatically filed with the court. So if someone does file a complaint, it automatically goes to the court, and then.
But it says here in number 3, pursuant to Tribal Code 14.110, the board will determine by positive majority. Like, it should be the courts.
That is just for if a conflict of interest exists on a matter that the board is voting on. It does not apply to any of the other conduct.
It doesn't say that, so I could really interpret it broadly, and we could fine or call a board member out of order for something that they did outside of the boardroom, could we not? Because it doesn't specifically say conflicts of interest in a board meeting.
No, I think 14 just governs the conduct of meetings.
Yeah, and it says it only applies if a director has a personal interest in a matter.
Yeah, but when okay.
What about a remedy, a judicial remedy? Because here's the thing, okay, all right, so if I'm sleeping with one of you, right? And somebody calls it in a conflict, that should be pretty clear. You got a conflict of interest. You should not be voting on the person who you're sharing your bed with. All right, but let's say the politics of the board say, that's not a conflict, with a straight face. So that should be appealable, because if the board makes the wrong choice because of politics, if there's a judicial remedy to that, so if there's you can petition the wrongful decision of the board for whatever reason, that should be able to be appealed. So maybe we need that, and to an administrative law judge, I see that you got that too. This is something we've been working on for 20 years. Maybe that would give me comfort, because it's not left entirely up to the politics of this board.
Right, but nowhere in here does it say strictly in a boardroom. It seems like this could be used broadly. It does?
No, I said, so could it just be added into that statement?
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, this isn't just for the boardroom. Like, this is a code of ethics. When I'm reading a code of ethics, I'm thinking like all the time, right? As acting as a board member.
So are you proposing changing the language where it only covers in the boardroom? Is anyone opposed to that?
But chapter 14 only applies to in the boardroom.
No, I know what we're looking.
You want to go beyond it?
We're looking at 03 right now, so maybe it just needs to be in the 14 and not in 03.
I think they'd just be more comfortable if it specifically stated that, even though it may not be necessary because 14 only covers the
But
boardroom.
reference is 14 though.
Go ahead.
At the end, because you can still interpret this outside of the boardroom.
Yeah, but how are you going to call someone in conflict on a vote when votes don't happen outside the boardroom?
It doesn't say anything about votes. This is a code of ethics, and you're talking about conflicts of interest. So I'm thinking of this living in my daily life. Somebody can call me out in the boardroom based on an action that I did in my own life.
Give me an example. Like let's make one up.
Oh, not that shady.
Yeah, you're a politician.
That was a good lie, wasn't it?
2F you have on here, adversely affecting the confidence of members of the tribe and integrity of the government and administration of the tribe. So if you made a post that someone here construed as you are adversely affecting the confidence of the members, then this, and as Aaron was stating, if you're just being an independent voice, but you have a positive majority up here that just doesn't like your post, what's the appeal to that? You're just gonna, this body says, hey, you're violating 2F. And this board goes, yep, they're violating 2F. And that's it, you're done. And so what's the appeal process to that vote? I think that's kind of what we were getting at.
Right. So I guess, I'm reading this much broader. So if this is only applying to our actions in the boardroom,
You gotta look at 1410. That's why I keep saying it, 14.110, because that very specifically limits it.
I think,
So
I
just
think
if
you
you
don't
want,
need it
restate
in this
14.110.
code. You clarify it in 14. So then it's not unclear that it applies to everything else. This is really, the conflict of interest is in voting. You have a conflict. So it's
Correct.
in the membership code.
All right, Aaron.
And I was just going to add that this is not theoretical, without going into detail. This whole BS about a censure for allegations that led to discipline and limited authority and pulling me off of NCAI, all of that was without any kind of evidence at all. And there was 10 votes. So that's why the threshold of a positive majority doesn't do it for me, because at that point in time, I was facing the ire of 10 board members, irrespective of any truth or validity. The investigation, which I can't talk about what the results were, but I can tell you that didn't lead to any criminal or civil or any kind of violation. So we should never leave it up to a mob scene that is bloodthirsty, that disagrees with an individual board member and can take an action against that board member. That's why we need a judicial remedy. It shouldn't be left to politicians to make an adjudicatory decision, because the temptation is just too great, It was me 2 years ago. It could be Austin next. We have precedence for it.
Okay, are we good on this area? Do we need work? Do we need to change what's up there right now?
I think we'll come back with some options for you on this one.
Okay, sounds good. Let's keep going then, Josh.
103-202 Standards of Conduct. Except as otherwise provided herein, no director or committee member shall solicit or accept on his or her own behalf any significant or substantial compensation, gift, reward, or gratuity from any source except for the following: ceremonial or customary gifts generally granted to dignitaries, food or refreshments commonly made available in the ordinary course of business meetings where a director or committee member is properly in attendance, and a non-financial award or honor customarily or publicly presented in recognition of public service.
Okay, Aaron.
The only thing I would add, well, two things I'd add to this is the ceremonial or customary is so broad that a trip to the Bahamas could be argued to be cultural. I know some cultural people that might make that argument. So there should be a requirement for disclosure if that's not yet contemplated. And then the other thing is, and this is truth, whether people ever want to admit it or not, but when you leave this board table, I don't believe you should be able to step out and get a contract to lobby this board on to get votes passed. That needs to be, I think that should be disclosed, like any past relationships you've had before you got to this table. Or I don't know if we can govern people for the rest of their lives, but certainly I know in Greektown, when we had Greektown licenses, if you left employment for Greektown or even the management board, you had a requirement for at least 1 year that you couldn't work for any entity that could lobby for this board. Our history shows us that that happened exactly on this board, where somebody left this board, was a paid consultant to get a vote for the consultant in the favor of the consultant to represent their interest at the expense of the public interest that you previously served on this board. So we need to have something solid that protects it and requires disclosure, because unless they are required to disclose it, we can't make a judgment of whether or not there's a conflict.
Okay, Tyler.
Notice how carefully I said that?
So then in this one, what's the enforcing body for this subsection?
If there is a violation under this subsection, it would require someone to submit a complaint to the tribal court, then the court process would begin to see if the complaint is valid, and later in the code, it shows the steps for filing a complaint.
Is there something that I missed where it directs that to the courts?
In section,
Under enforcement?
yeah,
Okay, so one other question in this section. So I don't really like the language of number 3, because it says directors and committee members shall not violate the laws, resolutions, or policies of the tribe or federal or state law if applicable. What is applicable? Is a speeding ticket applicable? I mean, that's a violation of law.
We have to figure out what kind of offenses are going to trigger something.
Right.
Right?
If we're going to do this, and I support this, we need to clearly define some of this, because, again, as Aaron had mentioned a few times, if you get one group against the other, it can be pretty petty. I don't know how else to put it, but it can be petty, and we're trying to get away from that. So I think the further we define these things about what is an injustice or what is unethical, plus I really don't like putting state laws in there, even though we should follow most of them. I don't follow the speed limit, though. Don't tell anybody that.
Okay. Rob.
I don't follow legally laws.
No, I was just going to mention that I would prefer to take state out of there anyways, because if we're covered under federal and tribal, then that's really all we need to follow, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, if we're off of tribal land, we got to follow state laws individually, but I didn't think that should be codified. The other thing is would we be able to enforce a time limit after service to working with any of our partners, developers, anything that has to do with the tribe? Would we be able to say, look, at after 5 years of office, you're not allowed to do it, and you sign when you take your oath office?
so part of this code, later in this code, is enforcing a 2-year limitation on the actions of a board member to follow this code after they leave office. And part of that 2 years is so after 2 years, the next election cycle begins, and a lot of the information they had while in office could no longer be confidential information. And then that would give them the ability to no longer be under this code until they are, or if they are elected again.
I would honestly like to see that extended to like 5, and then what is our ability to enforce that? Because this has cost us $88 million, well, 30, I mean, it's literally cost us $30 million. So I'd like to protect against that. I never am.
So Josh, how do you enforce
say it
something
by
like
name.
that? So if I'm a board member and if I want to embarrass future leaders, and if I take confidential documents and I give them to people in the community to put on Facebook, what happens to me if this passes?
It would give the same guidelines as if someone was filing a complaint against an active board member. The complaint would have to be filed with the tribal court, then it would go through the court process, and the court would make a determination.
So what
on
happens
any
if someone doesn't
sanctions.
live on trust land? Do they have to sign something similar to when you become a candidate that you surrender jurisdiction to tribal court for X amount of years in regards to certain complaints in a certain area such as this?
Yeah, that would be the best practice to implement. And currently, if someone who's not on the board right now, this code could not be enforced on past actions. they
It
have
couldn't be
done.
enforced ex post facto.
Yeah.
Okay. Aaron?
Our Constitution, a board member who lost an election one time, a long, long time ago, was pissed off and burnt all the files, the secretary files, for a period of time. That should be actionable, because that property belongs to the tribe.
The counter to that is the secretary doesn't take files home anymore. You know what I mean? They don't have specific copies that are just unique to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, Josh, that answers my question then.
Number 4, directors or committee members shall not conduct official business while under the influence or affected by intoxicating liquor or any drug. Directors or committee members shall not commit perjury or fraud. Directors or committee members shall safeguard data and preserve the integrity of tribal government and operations by not disclosing any confidential information, nor shall he or she use such information for his or her personal gain, benefit, or political benefit. Directors or committee members participating virtually in a meeting or to otherwise conduct any official business of the board of directors or committee shall ensure confidentiality by complying with all the requirements in Chapter 96, the Open Meeting Ordinance.
Aaron?
So I like the number 4. I'm a sober person, so that's easy for me to like it, right? But one of the challenges is, and without naming names, and I won't even look anywhere in any directions, is some board members that have gone to like NCAI or gone to testify have gotten shit-faced, sloshed around and all sloppy drunk in the hotel. So can we expand this to cover when you're on official business of the tribe?
That could be an option if that is what the board would like to have included in the code.
If you're traveling to, if you're on the tribe's dime, you should not be, if you're a closet drinker or whatever, stay in your room, but don't be walking around, you know, like falling against the counter or. I'm the place of Sault Ste. Marie tribe, I've seen that stuff. Or sneaking into another board member's bedroom. I just, something that will protect us from our reputation, because people see this stuff. How I found out about it is other people told me from other tribes. Oh, I saw blankety blank. Couldn't even stand.
All right. Let's keep going, Josh.
Former directors and committee members will be subject to sanctions under this chapter if they intentionally disclose confidential information they receive pursuant to their role as a director or a committee member to benefit their personal, financial, or political interests. Are there any questions on this section?
Any questions? Okay, no questions, Josh.
103, 203 Statute of Limitations. No action may be brought under this code of ethics more than 2 years after the action has occurred or the director or committee member has left office, whichever is longer. If an action is considered criminal conduct under Tribal Code Chapter 71, this code does not impose any statute of limitations on potential criminal charges. Are there any questions on this section?
Any questions, guys? No questions.
Subchapter 3 Resolution 103-301 Enforcement. Any director who in good faith and based upon reasonable information and belief contends that a director has violated this chapter may file a sworn written statement with the board administrator. A separate sworn written statement must be submitted for each director being accused of violating this chapter, regardless of whether the statement involves the same facts, proof, or evidence. The board administrator will automatically refer the matter to the Sault Ste. Marie Chippewa Tribal Court and provide copies of the sworn written statement to the accused and the rest of the board. The sworn written statement must include facts giving rise to a violation of this code and any substantiation, proof, or evidence, and identification of any portions of the statement that are based on the first-hand knowledge and portions that are based only on hearsay and the steps taken to verify the hearsay statements, the identity of the director believed to have committed the violation, and the name, contact information, and signature of the person submitting the statement. Upon referral of a sworn written statement,
So are we saying that's going to be put on Lana?
you'll file it with Lana and then she will send it to the court to begin that process.
Kind of like if somebody submits removal petitions, they come to me, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
And
just
then I
it's
have to-
administrative function.
Yeah.
Okay, and so is there going to be guidance on what her responsibility is in that? Like, is it mandatory and jurisdictional? She's got to follow up because nothing to do with Lana, but I can see our previous administrator would be chomping at the bit to file it against me, but other certain board members, probably not. So will it be embedded in the job description, or what will compel the board administrator to have to do that follow-up? I know it's ministerial, but,
We could incorporate into the code that they have to automatically refer it within a certain number of days to the tribal court.
okay, okay. Yeah, that protects the board administrator too, because there's not a judgment being made on whether or not to do it.
Right, my only role would be I scan it in, send the full board a copy, and write over to the tribal court. I
Yeah.
have no other,
Would there be a necessity to inform the full board?
it says it in here that I would,
It does, okay,
to the accused and the rest of the board.
okay. Oh,
I don't know, I guess I'd like to kind of ponder whether the board should be informed if those complaints were made, because we've seen many leaked documents come from this board. I could write whatever I want about Aaron if I want to, and then send it to Lana. She's gonna send it to the rest of the board. I might know it's never gonna go anywhere in court, but it's gonna look pretty bad, and I could write it as brutal as I wanna write it. So I don't really, I think if we have Lana send it directly to the court and let them decide, if it has merit and they decide to go after it, then it gets published. If not, then why would you, I don't see why we would give ourselves the ability to weaponize something like that.
To give you guys some information, things have been weaponized, like the election commission type of stuff. When you have to go through 5 or 6 frivolous complaints in a row where only one person is voting to send them to the courts, I mean, you can kind of figure a game is being played. And if we're going to rework any more codes, I'd like to see that in there as well, as just a mechanism to screen out frivolous stuff so it doesn't see the light of day. Because even if something's frivolous, it can cause damage. I mean, you could make a report, Aaron Paymont abuses kids, and, you know, when it hits the court, you know, it's going to be taken care of because it's obviously not true. But if that's what people see, a lot of people don't understand our process. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I would just add, why does it have to be the board administrator at all? Why can't it just be the court administrator?
That could be included. Part of the reason was including the board administrators, because once these complaints are filed, it turns into litigation between board members, which will involve them hiring their own attorneys, arguing for grounds to have a court justify a violation that could result in a potential removal petition.
Oh, yeah, we've seen that before.
Upon referral of the sworn written statement to the court, the hearing officer / panel shall conduct a non-appealable administrative hearing and is empowered to take any action found in section 103.302. The hearing officer / panel shall be able to request that the sworn written statement be formatted into a petition as required for court documents. The administrative hearing shall be conducted pursuant to Tribal Code Chapter 89. The administrative hearing shall occur no later than 45 days after the referral, and the hearing officer / panel shall issue an order on the referral no later than 59 days after the referral. If upon conducting an administrative hearing, the hearing officer / panel finds that the accusations to be frivolous, the hearing officer / panel is empowered to take any action found in section 103.302 against the accuser. There any questions on these sections?
Yeah, so,
Go ahead, Rob.
so there would be no appeal process?
No, the administrative hearing would be the chief arbiter of any complaints that are filed.
I think anything that's adjudicated should have an appeal process. I think that's to borderline to violation in due process. I mean, you're sending it to one deciding factor, and you don't know what kind of political ramifications they might have, or what kind of viewpoints they might have. I mean, I don't agree with not giving someone an appeal process.
Tyler, the mic.
So fully agree with Rob. I don't know why I'm supportive of ethics at this point. I think we need to just get serious about talking about these constitutional amendments and focus on separating the powers officially instead of this. There's clearly some concerns here with not having due process, not having the proper court systems in place. I think we need to work with our courts. We need to work with our citizens, and we just need to focus on this because this is, I mean, we all have the same concerns about each other, and the only thing that's going to fix that is separating us.
Mike.
I don't disagree. I think the separation or some form of it probably should be the priority before we get into dissecting all this, because the going straight to administrative hearing for every single thing, and it doesn't get deemed frivolous until after a hearing is conducted, is probably going to get pretty costly as well. Right. So there's no mechanism in just initially deeming it frivolous. So and that in itself is going to be an argument, right? So without that separation, it's going to be difficult to adjudicate. So I'm not sure how we proceed. So I'll yield.
Aaron.
So, all right. I want to be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bath. There's many, many reasons that we need to improve upon what was in the past. The current ethics code from 1993 was put in place to remove Bev Lewis. It was written for that purpose. If you read through it, it reads like an attack. There's no due process. It's up to a majority of the board to decide. So if the reason we started on this path was to get past that sort of arbitrary and capricious way to operate. The other thing is that an allegation should require a prima facie case to be made. because we spend a lot of time and effort in this tribe on adjudicating things that costs the tribe money. I won't name any names, but somebody in the last couple of years has had a whole bunch of crap in front of the court, in front of the tribe, legal, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees or staff time, court fees, all of that, for stuff that ultimately is just dismissed. And so it's a balancing act because you want to have due process. So if you're the person filing it, you want to know it's been seriously considered, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, like the one complaint of whether or not this person had whether or not they had standing to file something, that went the whole 9 yards, and in the end, the judge ruled that the person did not have standing, the board had not delegated that. So that seems like a whole lot of time, expense, money, a lot of politics that were probably designed to frustrate the current operations of the tribe, the current board, illegitimize the current board, et cetera, et cetera. So there should be a requirement for some kind of basic prima facie case to be made. Now, the balancing act is that individuals are not necessarily attorneys, so you should be able to file something, but it seems like we shouldn't go down, and I'll use the censure too, and all the allegations in the censure, there was nothing in there that was removable, it was all conjecture. We shouldn't be chasing our tail where there's nothing actually underlying that could end up being a criminal offense or something. So there needs to be some kind of a checkpoint. I won't go so far as to say that there should be a penalty for the people filing frivolous complaints, but we do need some kind of protection against that too.
Here's something to consider as well. Not only does it hurt people like reputation-wise if a frivolous complaint is made, it hurts you financially too, because if it does go over the court, you want to protect yourself, you want to protect your reputation. A lot of times you pay for counsel, which costs thousands of dollars. So we could consider, if something is sent to the court and if a tribal leader defends himself, they get reimbursed for their legal fees if it ends up in their favor. I mean, it's expensive.
I would support that because I spent at least $10,000 in legal representation for what in both cases ended up being our court's decision. It was arbitrary, capricious, and the election committee overstepped their authority. There should be some consequence to them for having overstepped their authority. And the person who filed the complaint in the first place, because I had to pay out of pocket for that. So, anyway.
Okay, we can keep going, Josh.
Section 103.302, sanctions. The hearing officer / panel of the Sault Ste. Marie Chippewa Tribal Court is authorized to issue the following sanction or sanctions. The hearing officer / panel may issue a written public statement of disapproval of the director's or committee member's conduct that was found to be in violation of this code to be included in the next edition of the tribal newspaper and website. Written reprimand issued by the hearing officer or panel to the director. Verbal reprimand issued by the hearing officer / panel to the director. A fine up to $5,000 and all reasonable investigative costs. Referral to law enforcement if the conduct would constitute a criminal offense under Chapter 71 of Tribal Code. Referral back to the Board of Directors of a non-binding recommendation of removal, such as a recommendation shall satisfy Tribal Code Chapter 16, Section 16.1053C. Are there any questions on this section?
Any questions, Aaron?
So the part about the $5,000 fine does bring back a flashback for me. It's a little traumatizing because what I experienced in a very public way was the threat for a $5,000 fine unless you keep your mouth shut. It was disguised as comply with the censure requirements, but that was repeatedly brought up at several meetings that we're going to impose a $5,000 fine. So if we're talking about taking away somebody's constitutional rights or limiting them in some way, or their life or liberty or their income, the threshold has to be very, very high, not a political decision at this board. Because it's horrible. If you ever find yourself in that position, you'll understand what it's like to be threatened with a $5,000 fine unless you keep your mouth shut. That's exactly, and that's how the people saw it. People can argue with that, but the looming threat of a $5,000 fine if you don't agree with at least a positive majority of the board is a way to frustrate our ability to govern. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm saying there needs to be a high threshold and a standard of proof. A burden of proof has to be met, a minimum threshold has to be met, not just the political decision of a positive majority of the board.
Yeah, under the administrative hearing code that's being proposed, it does establish a burden of proof for those hearings. And under this code, it would take the ability to sanction away from the board table, and only the tribal court or the hearing officer / panel would have the authority to sanction board members.
So with that, one thing to keep in mind then is that if we pass anything, it has to be a cascade of companion legislation that has to change in order for it to work. Because if you pass an ethics code without passing the administrative code or clarifying the burden of proof, then this is just going to be misused. And I'm on the same page as Tyler with the real remedy is to pass a constitutional amendment with real rights and protections and due process in place, separation of powers. And so we're dancing around making accommodations for a makeshift, third world country governmental structure because we don't have that in place now. And that might be a remedy, but if we go down this path, we have to ensure that all of the elements have to be in place. And one other thing, if this current board has the presence of mind, and I do think we have a good board right now, if we have the presence of mind to put those in place with the companion pieces, that the next board isn't able to dismantle a piece of it so that it becomes just a political tool.
So there's a line in there, if you could, Josh, expand on it. What would all reasonable investigative costs be?
So that would be costs that the tribe incurred to follow up and hold the hearings for the complaint that was filed. So there's court costs, and if there's costs with having to staff the hearing board, that would be included in the investigative cost to investigate the allegations of the complaint.
Okay.
(103.303) Committee members. A committee member is subject to this subchapter 3 by a sworn statement being submitted to the board administrator. The board administrator will automatically refer the matter to the Sault Ste. Marie Chippewa Tribal Court and provide copies of the sworn written statement to the accused and the rest of the committee and the board of directors. All provisions of subchapter 3 that are directed at directors are likewise directed at committee members. The following committees are exempt from enforcement under this code: the Election Commission. Their conduct shall be governed by Chapter 10 of Tribal Code, and the Sioux Tribe Inc. Board of Directors. Their conduct shall be governed by their charter.
Aaron? Oh, don't apologize.
So the only problem I have with that is, so I know there were ethical issues on the election committee. I know some things that nobody's formally told me that I've been able to piece together. And I know there was some ethic violations from an individual member of the election committee. And I know that that stuff was all referred over to the court. The court dismissed it, but the details were not reported over to the tribal court. So I don't know if I'm comfortable giving amnesty to the election committee, because based on what I heard, there were some really egregious things, including my personal financial information that was shared by an individual board member and left on a copier at the Big Bear. And I don't know that officially, but we're a tribe, right? So the Moccasin Telegraph, I had several people that I've worked with for years that called me and told me the full detail, including people being on video, making photocopies. So I just don't know how comfortable I am leaving it up to the Chapter 10 for remediation. So maybe the answer to that is to strengthen Chapter 10 and make that better and more clear. But I know that I was aggrieved and my rights were violated, and that person's still able to continue to do what they're doing. And what I've learned over the years, if there isn't a consequence, people are going to continue to do exactly what they were doing. They get permission. So, anyway, so I don't know, why would it have to be exempted for Chapter 10?
The reason it is written as exempted for Chapter 10 is because Chapter 10 enforces their own procedures for handling any actions by a member of the Election Commission. So if we were going to work on modifying the Election Commission to fall under this proposed code, we would have to work on reworking Chapter 10.
Or maybe align the provisions in the ethics code, the election code, to be parallel with the provisions in this code. So, because obviously, my opinion about whether that worked in the election code is that it didn't, so.
And that is the latest draft of the Code of Ethics.
All right, I appreciate it, Josh. So obviously, this is a working document. We're going to have at least one more draft in front of us before we're ready to have something to vote on. Any final questions, comments for Josh?
I just have a.
Yeah.
Where are we with establishing an administrating hearing code? Because in the past, we have talked about doing this, and I think I would much rather have that professional standard established, like the Administrative Rules Act. There's remedies, right? Short of tribal court. The standards are very similar in an administrative code. Because the one application that I think would be way better would be under the appeals process should not be left to politicians to decide. And we put that in place at a point in time because people were being fired by the casino manager left and right without regard to $3 million in unemployment compensation, without any due process rights. So we put that in place because we had nothing. But it's time for us to take the next step and evolve as a government, so it's not a political decision. Because right now, it's left up to the political whims of, if you get the luck of the draw of the board, to be on your appeal process. And if decisions are made that are not consistent with policy, you shouldn't be able to make a decision inconsistent with policy. Was the policy followed or not? That should be the standard. So an administrative law judge is much more likely to follow that than lay people who are not attorneys, and that's not their specific, well, it is their job, but whether they adhere to it or not. So where are we with the administrative law code?
It's on all of our desks. It was put together a long time ago by Alice Walker. It's pretty good. It's almost turnkey. We've internally been wanting to bring it to you as part of this code. If this code isn't going to move quickly, we're going to want to bring it back in front of you anyway. I won't say it's hard, but the key component to that administrative hearing code is we would need to assemble a pool of attorneys that specialize in this kind of work that are somewhat on call. So if something is triggered, say we have 10 lawyers out there in the world on contract, some mechanism to select what the panel will consist of, and they handle it. There is a group of tribal judges and some tribal attorneys that kind of do a circuit downstate. They sit on various tribal courts downstate. If you've ever heard the name Mike Petoskey, for example, and there's some others, we would look to that kind of group to fill this role. And what you'll hear us tell you whenever that workshop comes is it's probably a much better option than using tribal court. At the end of the day, tribal court's still full of tribal employees. There's a lot of angst that we then send across the road, and they don't appreciate it. This way, we send it to third-party outsiders that are experienced in handling tribal matters, so they understand what's happening behind the scenes. It would be a good fix, and it's something we've probably been needing to do for a very, very long time. So it's kind of teed up, Aaron.
Okay, Tyler.
So, going back to something that Aaron said, would that incorporate like appeal hearings, the administrative hearing?
Once we get that appeal, if we ever get the administrative hearing ordinance or code set up, we would then go back and decide what we want to send there. We could. It'll have a financial cost to it, so it'll become a budget issue at some point. All the big ticket items would very likely end up going there. As far as those purely administrative, such as HR appeals, I don't think we've ever had that conversation, but it'd be up to you what you want to send.
I know not everybody is supportive of this, but I mean, just look at some of our recent history. I do not think government should be interfering with those appeal processes. I mean, we've had clear issues. We've tried to reduce it even reducing the amount of board members on there is not helping. And I don't think we should be interfering with that. We have key staff, they make decisions, and then they look, I don't know. I don't want to go too far with this one, but I just don't think it's the role of the government to sit on an employee hearing panel.
Aaron?
So, and I'll be careful how I say it. In the most pure sense, right, these are our members. We care about our members. We don't want them to lose their job. And so in the most innocent sense, we might be erring on the side of putting them back to work even if they violated policy. That's demoralizing to the staff that took all the time and effort to impose the policy, and if they were justified with getting terminated, but we feel sorry for them, so we give them their job back. Also, there's a thing called rent seeking in political science. We're all looking for the next vote so that we can still be here, right? And that's not to say that everybody's that unethical. They'll vote to put somebody back to work just to get a vote out of them. But on the flip side, on the negative side, is I know that in the administration and the chair's office in the past, there was solid justification for termination. And the board members that were selected were on the opposite side of the chairperson. And they basically, this is their way to just kind of put it to the chairman, put the person who violated policy right back, irrespective of the HR review, legal review, the policy being violated, didn't matter. Those board members had their chance to screw over the chairman and put the person back. That shouldn't be possible. The appeal board should only look at, was a policy violated? Did they follow progressive discipline? And did it warrant a termination? And if that's the case, the appeal board shouldn't be able to factor anything else in. For those of you who've been on appeals, what happens is they'll start throwing everything but the kitchen sink in. Oh, but you did this person a different way or that person a different way. None of that matters. What matters is, did you follow policy? Did you violate policy? Was termination justified? So if any board members are making decisions to vote to put people back aside from that, they're doing an injustice to the tribe because they themselves are violating policy. So an administrative law judge who is given that direction has to follow policy. Board members don't have to follow policy because what's the consequence if they don't?
Okay, so speak on this, and then we're finished up on this item. So I completely agree with utilizing an administrative law judge or a panel of judges. I mean, at a certain point, if we're going to say that we need to have powers separated from us to have checks and balances, then this body shouldn't have a veto over every single employee that might be terminated from the tribe. You know what I mean? Like, come on, I'm a social worker. I shouldn't be able to say, well, that guy was a bad dentist, I'm giving him his job back. You know, that falls completely out of my area of expertise, and I should be supporting, you know, the leadership at wherever that individual is working, you know, and if we need to have due process, which we do need to have, then an administrative law judge or a set of panel with those judges would satisfy that completely. All right, thanks, Josh, I appreciate it, and looking forward to you coming back with the latest draft of this. So let's move on to the next item. We're going to cover the housing plan, and then we'll finish up with Josh's last item, and then we'll be gone for the day. So Joni, if you want to come up with your staff, we'll go ahead and get started whenever you're ready. Whenever you're ready, Joni. Yep, we have a couple, so we got to use microphones.
So what we have is we also have an electronic version that can be emailed out to the entire board as well as the paper packets. So Kate's going to pull it up and share her screen for those members on Zoom. Excuse me. Pardon me? Okay. I think I'll get started while she's pulling that up. I want to mention that, excuse me, I want to mention that along with the 2025 Indian Housing Plan, we also have some other projects that we're going to be working on. Well, we've started working on. We're working with the Unit 2 board members on their ARPA housing. We've hired an architect and engineer. We've had a first meeting with them. Their environmentals are being completed. We have also started working with Unit 3 board members on their ARPA housing. We've had 2 meetings with the architects and engineers on the vacant land that they have in St. Ignace for infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, all of that, and then potentially housing as well. We have we sent out RFPs for Unit 5. We have the environmental we have the bids for the environmental. We also have bids for architect and engineers for the 6 tiny homes that Tyler had looked at for the current housing site. So we're moving along with those projects. Board members and 3 members of the housing team are going down at the end of this month to tour some tiny homes. So that's pretty exciting to see what the options are for our climate, so to speak.
I think that's what he was asking.
And then we also have, as we started all of these projects, we also were awarded $6 million for an apartment complex that's going to get started at Odenung for single persons. So that is all on top of what we're going to talk about in our Indian Housing Plan today. So the first thing I'd like to go over is there's a memo in there, and it just outlines some of the things that may be different this year. I always like to point those things out because there's a lot of repetitive projects or activities that are in the plan each year. So we're going to do some elder quad porches, some composite decking. It's going to be a carryover from this year. And then we are also looking potentially, the operations manager has given me a couple budgets that we can add into our maintenance and modernization. We really need to do some furnace replacements. We did submit a grant in July, the Indian Community Development Block Grant, for $2.5 million. There's a $500,000 match in here. We are hoping to receive that to replace about 175 furnaces. Home rehab is accepted year-round now. We've had renewable energy on our plan for a few years now, probably since right before COVID. We haven't had the staff to pick up that ball and move it. They've kind of pieced it here and pieced it there. Next year, we're going to hire a consultant. We really want to get that ball moving and do a feasibility study. So we've got some good information to go out after some of those grants for renewable energy. We've designated program income funds for a low-income housing tax credit project for permanent supportive housing. Our goal is to develop a 36-unit apartment complex that we will have available for permanent supportive housing. We're going to use the Housing First model, where members come in if they're actively using. They come in right where they're at. We meet them right where they're at, and then services are provided to them while they're residing there. We anticipate, with talking to ACFS, that some of those members will come from the Lodge of Hope. They'll come from there to permanent supportive housing. So we're pretty excited about that. Part of our new strategic plan that will be coming to the board yet in September for final approval is we plan to hire an architect and engineering firm to develop plans and cost estimates for vacant land in Wetmore and in Escanaba. We've been building a lot locally where we've had land and infrastructure, but this is vacant land, so we need to look at what needs to happen there so that we can go out after additional grants. Number 7, our Escanaba Community Center looks a bit, I won't say deplorable, but it looks a bit worn now that it sits in front of that beautiful new community center in Escanaba. So we are going to do some upgrades there, some paint, some siding, so that it looks a little prettier in front of there.
So before we move on from this topic, Kim Hampton has a question or comment.
You're referring to the YEA building, correct?
Yes,
It's 1226 Wagab?
yes.
Okay. The YEA manager coordinator over there said something like that to me a couple weeks ago when I saw her. So now I know what she's talking about. Okay, thank you.
Okay. We annually provide financial assistance to the Mary Murray Culture Camp. We have a budget with limited financial assistance to YEA, the Advocacy Resource Center, TAP, and other community enrichment events. It's about $58,000 a year that we have available for all of that. So we do sponsor a lot of community events. And then always we review grant opportunities. And so this plan needs to be submitted electronically to HUD by October 15th. So I think that the best piece that we're going to look at, the next page, is the Indian Housing Plan at a glance. What this does is it outlines each one of the activities and the budget for it. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this versus the electronic version. It's pretty lengthy, it's pretty cumbersome. It is in here for your review, though. So the first one is modernization. We routinely do sidewalks and driveway repairs every year. I mentioned that the Elder Quad deck replacements, and of course the ICDBG match if we're awarded that grant. 3.2 is operations. This includes vacant units. It includes our operations administration, public works, which is snow removal, lawn care for elders. Our CapEx is all in here. Activity 3.3 is the Lodge of Hope. We're looking to use program income. This is a new activity, and it's a placeholder today with $100,000. I didn't want to have to go back and do an amendment to the IHP. The tribe did receive the state funding that I understand will be used starting, I believe, October 1st. It may be available. And then we'll have funding to fill in the gaps if it does not, if there isn't enough operational funding for the full year. So I know that talking with accounting, we're still waiting on the parameters of the funding and so on. So I am working with accounting on that. 3.4 is down payment assistance. And we reduced the budget by about $20,000 this year. We're not seeing as many applications due to the interest rates. The interest rates are kind of high still, so there hasn't been quite as much interest, especially locally in the Sault Ste. Marie area, because there's a limited number of affordable homes for sale. Going on to page 2. This is our home rehabilitation services. So we have we actually have, you know what, this is, I apologize. So the home rehabilitation program, where it says 127,500, that's actually 240,000. That's up to $60,000. So those two titles got switched. Weatherization is up to 127,500. And then owner-occupied rehabilitation is water heaters and furnaces for members who own their home and don't have the funds to replace it. So that is that budget. I mentioned the renewable energy project, and we plan to hire a subcontract this year to get that project up and off the ground. 3.7 is emergency housing services. This is the funding that ACFS administers for us, and it will cover first month's rent, security deposit. It helps with preventing an eviction or a foreclosure. And I will tell you that even though we have the Lodge of Hope, we are still processing a number of hotel stays. I would say that's close to, I would say probably half, maybe. So we still have members that we're paying for hotel stays. The next one is the rental assistance voucher program. And this is members who rent off the reservation, and we subsidize their rent. Going on to page 3. Excuse me. This is tenant resident services. So this is lease monitoring. These are the staff that are in the homes. They're providing guidance, they're providing services, and anything that the resident may need outside referral agencies. Their goal is to give that resident all the tips, tools, and skills that they need to remain in housing. The next one is activity 3.10. This is maintenance and operation of NAHASDA units. It mirrors the operation, or the one that we talked about earlier. It's vacant units. We have to break it out between our 1937 Act units and NAHASDA. It's a requirement in the plan. So this is our warehouse, our public works. It has some CapEx in it. It has non-routine maintenance. So non-routine maintenance could be a sewer dig. It could be some kind of an emergency with a house. And I didn't mention it, but we also have that in the 1937 Act unit for $41,400, I believe. So that's any type of an emergency. If we have to call in, say, Atlas for extraordinary cleaning or something like that. And then lastly, in this section, we have the Elder Complex in St. Ignace, and that budget is operating expenses for the Elder Complex. Activity 3.1 is housing management services. This is our grant writing. This is maintaining our waiting list, processing applications, working with our home buyers in the lease to purchase program, and maintaining all of the tenant files. And so that is all the staff members associated with that as well. Going on to page 4. This is crime prevention and safety services. The Housing Authority supports the K-9 through Sioux Tribe Law Enforcement. So this is any expenses for the K-9 or any training for the officer in the K-9. So that's what that is. Activity 3.13 is community centers. These are model activities. They have to be approved separately by HUD, and they are the community center in Hessel, the Escanaba YEA building, the Manistee YEA house, and the Wetmore YEA that is housed at the warehouse on the Wetmore housing site. And as I mentioned, the Escanaba budget is a little bit higher this year than the norm to complete some of those exterior upgrades. 3.14 is the low-income housing tax credit project, and that will be funded by program income. We plan to make application, the next round that we plan to make application would be in October of 2025. We're also looking at and writing right now, and I'll be bringing a resolution to the board. It's called the Continuum of Care Build, and it's for homeless prevention. It's for permanent supportive housing, and it's $7.5 million. So we'll be developing that application right now and bringing that forward to the board. Activity 3.18, new housing development planning. I've got $175,000 in here for each of the sites, would be Wetmore and for Escanaba, the vacant land there. Starting to get those cost estimates and looking at the land and developing housing sites. So that is that one. Going on to page 5. The last one is planning and administration. This covers payroll, it covers our accounting, environmental, legal, all of the contracts that we have for services, along with payment in lieu of taxes, and insurance for all of the homes that we manage. So the total IHBG funds is $8,104,913. Program income is $2,600,000. Applicable credits is $221,789, for a total for next year of $10,926,702. Applicable credits does not, it shows up in this budget and it shows up in our internal budget, but it does not show up in the official IHP budget that goes to HUD. All we do there is program income and NAHASTA. Applicable credits are things that they can be work orders that tenant caused damage, something like that. The majority of garbage service, the housing authority pays, then we bill that out monthly with their rent. Things like utility services in Newberry, they won't bill our tenants directly for water and sewer. They bill us, we bill the tenant. So it's things like that. And then very lastly, our estimated block grant is $6,194,147. So we will be drawing down some of those reserves. The next section is the required HUD format. It's an electronic submission. So you can see it's kind of cumbersome to read. There's a lot of information in there. I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm going to just highlight just a few things. So if we look on page, let me see. If we go to page 6, this talks about what the eligible activities are that we can partake in or carry out, the measurement, and then the output completion. And these are all required in the IHP. Number 7 continues with that. So page 8 starts, so you can see this is modernization. It goes into the program description, the eligible activity, the intended outcome, who will be assisted, types and levels of assistance, and then the planned and actual outputs for the 12-month program year. So there is the activities that I just spoke about in the at a glance. There's a page and an activity outlined like this in the electronic version of the IHP. It's not in numerical order, it's just the way it prints. So we go from 3.1, and on page 9, we go to 3.10, and it kind of jumps around, but there's nothing we can do about that. So I was thinking I would kind of jump forward rather than going through all of those pages, if it's okay with the board.
So what were you asking, Joni?
I wasn't going to go through each one of these activity pages.
I don't think we need to, so it's
Okay.
in front of all of us, so yeah, we can take the
Okay.
abbreviated approach.
Okay, sounds good. That's what I thought too. If we jump to page 24, this says maintaining 1937 Act units, demolition and disposition. We don't have any for this year. We won't be disposing of any units. Page 25 is the budget format, and as I mentioned earlier, this is different. This number is going to be different than what I explained earlier because of the applicable credits. Page 26 is the budgeting for each one of the activities individually. I'm going to jump ahead to page 30. So what this is this is the IHP tribal certification. The resolution that the board passes authorizes me to submit the button for the IHP electronically. But if you'll note, right in the middle, it does state that the Board of Directors had the opportunity to review the IHP or IHP amendment and has authorized the submission of the IHP by the TDHE. And I just wanted to point that out. Page 31 is our tribal wage rate certification, which we do. We have a tribally determined wage rate. Excuse me. The next section is the Nahasda Consolidated Budget. The first page, you can see, mirrors what I just talked about at a glance. If we go on to page 1, this shows any potential carryover. This shows the planned expenses, and then any potential remaining funds at the end of that year. Page 2 is all of the same activities that I just mentioned. So it's page 2, page 3, and page 4 are the exact same budgets that I went through during the at a glance portion. Excuse me. The next part is a consolidated budget. And we started doing this budget a few years ago because this was the format that at the time the seated board liked to look at, so that they could look at where we're at currently and where we're moving forward to. So page 1 is our consolidated budget. And right now through June, we've spent 4.3 million. And then the overall budget of 204,000. And it shows our funding sources. So we have a funding source of HUD. We have ARPA money left. We have rental income. There's fees, fund balance, and fund balance that's restricted, and then other sources of income. Going on to page 2, sidewalks and driveways. We've reduced the 2025 budget. We don't believe we're going to have as many to do, but it shows that we haven't spent any money yet this year. It's under contract, so that work is being done. Page 3 is the quad project that I mentioned. It's going to start this fall as well. So that's why there isn't any expenses yet. Page 4 is our ICDBG matches. This one is for the, you can see that there's nothing actual in June because we don't know whether or not we're going to be awarded that grant yet. Page 5 is our operations. You can see that our expenses are pretty well in line with our budget for half a year. Routine maintenance. Again, you can see we're pretty well in line with our budget halfway through the year with our revenue and expenses. Vacant unit maintenance. We use an average of the last couple years because we never know how many vacant units we're going to get. So it's an estimate. And we're pretty well in line with the expenses for this year. Non-routine maintenance. This year, we had 30,000 and we've only had $9,500 worth of non-routine or emergency maintenance that I talked about earlier. Warehouse administration. Again, halfway through the year, we're pretty well in line with our budget. The Public Works Administration. This appears that we're not quite in line. However, there's also CapEx in there. So we've got vehicles. We've purchased lawnmowers that haven't hit yet as of June. I just signed for 2 new trucks. We've got a lot of that in the works right now, and some of those vehicles are still on order. So this does look a little lopsided for the 6 months. Down payment assistance. We've had some closings in the last 2 months, but as I mentioned earlier, with the interest rates, we're not getting as much interest as we have in the past. The renewable energy feasibility study, the budget this year, and again, we haven't had the staff to pick up this project. So we're going to change how we move it forward next year. Home rehabilitation services, it shows a budget of $879. Lots of projects underway right now. There's lots going on. And I'd like to point out that our total budget in 2025 is $545,921. What happens is some of those projects don't conclude in the year, and we have carryover money. So that's why you're seeing a 2024 budget of $879. And we're finally coming off of the COVID issue where we couldn't get contractors. We were having a really difficult time. So we're doing much better with that. So each year, there usually is some carryover money of projects. So this is the next page, on page 14, is the IHBG competitive match. This is the 40 units that are concluding at Odenung this year. So this is additional money to complete that. There isn't a budget for 2025 because this will close as of 12/31 this year. We did have in the budget for the low-income housing tax credit project. And we have a consultant. We have free consulting through HUD that's working with us, but we were not ready to make that application this year.
So I have a quick question about that, Joni. So I'm really excited that we're going to be applying for this, but at the end of the day, it's a competitive process and it's something that we have to apply for. When is the application deadline, and then when will we be notified whether or not we're selected or not?
So I'm going to give you 2 different things because we're
Okay.
going to, I mentioned the Continuum of Care Build Grant. That's a competitive grant, and the consultant is helping us with that. That is a HUD grant. It's due November 11th. Typically with HUD, you find out about 6 months later. The other So this is the low-income housing tax credit. It is also permanent supportive housing. So we can kind of go either way. So we'll know long before we make application for, if we need to make application for permanent supportive housing through a LIHTC. Those are due in October. I don't know the deadline off
We're
the top of
talking
my
about
head.
the low-income tax credit application right now, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
am, through MISTA. It's on the website, so I apologize, but I can get that out to you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know the exact, when the awards are made. I mentioned earlier, new housing development.
Rob has a question or comment, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Hey, Joni, is the single-person complex on Odenong, that's a 16 unit, right?
Correct.
Do you have a timeline of any kind of expected timeline for completion on that?
I do. So we're doing the RFP right now for the architect and engineering. So we want to get that underway. This is a little bit different than any apartment complex that we built in the past. There is a lot of renewable energy. There is a lot of, like, we're going to use solar shingles, and it's just going to be a really unique project. So we're going to sub this out completely. Our force account will be working on the other projects that we have. So we plan on getting it ready for bid next year, and then they will have 2 years to construct it. What we did in the grant application was that it would be done by 2028. So we did take the full 5 years. However, I anticipate it wouldn't take that long by subbing it out, subbing the entire project out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Page 16, I mentioned new housing development, and I've talked about that earlier for Wetmore and Escanaba, and that's part of our strategic plan. Page 17 is the Lodge of Hope. Page 18,
So I have a question about the Lodge of Hope.
Yes.
I was going to ask all these at the end, but I figure if we're addressing them as we go through, it might just be easier. So you guys as Housing Commission agreed to fund the Lodge of Hope's operating costs for 2025. However, the state of Michigan generously decided to do that for us. So has there been consideration to go back to the commission and find out if they'd be willing to fund it for 2026 onward?
I think that's the plan. I think
Okay.
that's the understanding.
Okay.
There's not been a resolution passed, but yes, that is the understanding of the commission.
Okay.
That we'll be providing operational funds from here on out once that funds are gone.
Okay. If we could have a vote on that rather soon, I mean, it would help this body determine how we're going to fund it in the future. So, I mean, we went out and we sought an appropriation from the state, and this, determining whether or not the authority is going to fund it moving forward will give us direction on what to do. So that's basically my request
Okay.
from you guys.
Okay, so you'd like the commission to pass a resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if they're agreeable to it, yep.
Okay, yep, you know what, we can bring one forward in September.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Page 18 is emergency housing services. The budget in 2024 is $96,000. We're probably going to add more funds to that because we're going through it pretty quick, and we have funds to do that. We did a budget of $85,000 for 2025, but we kind of keep track of it because it's such an important service to our members. So we do have funds that we can add to it if we run low during the year. The rental assistance voucher program shows a $60,000 budget. Through June, it was $19,000. We have done quite a few, or Maria has done quite a few selections, so we should be able to expend that entire amount by the end of the year. Tenant resident services, you can see is down. We've had some vacant resident services positions. They're hard to fill with the wage. So that's something that we're working through right now. The Nahasda unit operations on page 21. It really depends on what we have for Nahasda units. You know, if we don't have a lot of, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So that's unit operations. Let me go to routine maintenance. So we're pretty good there on maintaining those units when work orders are called in. On page 22. Page 23, you can see we had $12,000 for any type of non-routine, and we haven't had any issues to deal with. Those are our newer units as well, so no sewer digs, no extraordinary cleaning or something like that. Page 24 is vacant unit maintenance, and we haven't had a lot of vacant units turnover, so that are specifically Nahasda. The warehouse, we're pretty well in line with half a year with the $39,000 budget and the expenses of $15,000. Page 26 is Public Works. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's vehicles, there's equipment, there's things of that nature in there. So this will be spent down. The Elder Complex, the budget of 147 and actual through June is 54. Again, we've had a vacant resident services position, and some of those things do impact it. Other things impact it, like we've got like emergency, like say if you've got to do boiler cleaning or something like that, and if it doesn't come up, but it's budgeted and available if needed. Housing management services. This is pretty well in line for half a year. Crime prevention and safety on page 29. This year we purchased a new patrol car for the K-9 unit, and it has to be specially equipped for the K-9 unit. So you can see we went over budget by $168, but he did get the new vehicle. The Hessel Community Center, the budget is $276. It's higher this year because we also budgeted for replacing the Hessel Community Center parking lot and sidewalk coming in. It's under contract, and it will be done before the end of the year. Escanaba Community Center, the budget of $8,000, and we've spent almost $3,000. Wetmore Warehouse and the YEA Center. This budget is a little bit higher because we needed to replace the roof on that building and do a little bit of fascia and kind of spruce up the front entrance of the building. It needed some work. Manistee YEA.
Hey, Joni, Tyler has a question.
Sure.
Why are the, I'm sorry, maybe this was explained to me before, but why are the YEA centers under housing and not facilities?
They rent our buildings. They rent space in the buildings that the Housing Authority has. So years ago, Tyler, when we were building, the housing site in Escanaba, that was a garage, that community center that we converted to a YEA building. It was a storage garage for all the materials. We did the same thing in Wetmore. There was a big warehouse there. It was kind of like the hub.
So we converted space and we haven't gone back from that arrangement.
Housing funds, so it's in their stock, then they pay costs.
Okay, we can keep going.
Okay. Then the Manistee YEA house. Back in the day, we had a very short waiting list, and we couldn't keep those 4 bedrooms filled. So YEA utilizes one of the 4 bedrooms there.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Just a quick question on that. has it ever, I guess, because a 4-bedroom would be needed. And obviously, I know from living there at one point and working in housing that they literally rent a 4-bedroom house on the res. Has there been anything, I mean, I understand why they rent from housing, and it's better to have the YEA on the housing site because of the kids. Has there been any thought to building a separate building for the YEA and allowing that 4-bedroom to be rented out?
We haven't, we could explore that, though. Maria could look at the waiting list to see what we need.
Okay, and I did already, because I have so many questions or so many ideas, I'm not going to take up a whole bunch of time, so I did send you some emails already. One does have something to do with that vacant land adjacent to the Manistee housing site. So, I mean, that could even be an option to throw a YA or whatever. So anyway, that was just an idea.
Yep, thank you. Page 34 is housing administration. It looks like we're under, but our insurance on the units is prorated. It's about $260,000 a year. And PILT has not been paid out this year. And as I mentioned earlier, we have contracts, like with legal for legal services, with accounting for their services, and so on. Page 35 is the IHBG competitive cost center. There isn't a budget for 2025 because those 40 units will be done at Odenung. We're finishing the last 6 of them right now. Page 36, this shows a transfer out. It transfers out into cost center 80204, which is the competitive grant. So we keep all of the cost for those 40 units in one cost center because we have to make sure that we're not exceeding TDC, which is total development cost prescribed by HUD. Again, this will close at the end of this year. The next one on page 37 is the Sault Ste. Marie roof project. And we have done all of the roofs. We had planned to do 66. Actually, there will be a budget for 2025. We've not developed it yet. The reason being is, number one, we had cost savings. We had cost savings of about $300,000. And then we're doing a program with DTE. And so anything that so we did extra insulation. They're giving us rebates. We're looking at probably over $200,000. Our operations manager, DTE reached out to us. Our operations manager has been working with them. So there's a lot of rebates that we're eligible for. We're going to be eligible for rebates on the last 6 units we're building at Odenung. So that will come back in as program income. And so once we know exactly what those rebates are for the roofs, we're keeping it separate, then a budget will be developed for 2025, and we will continue to replace roofs with the savings and the program income. The next one is actually program income, and this is the budget. For 2024, this was for the low-income housing tax credit project. And I think that's a typo. I apologize for that. It says the total budget for 2025 is $50,000. It's actually $500,000. Just so you know, that is a typo. Page 39 is the Shunk Road office. This is the first housing office that was built with HUD funds, and we rent that property out to ACFS for their offices. We outgrew it, so we ended up in Kinross. The next one on page 40 is non-program income, and this is our operating expenses. So there, we have positions in there, and things of that nature. So So page 41 is Evergreen Shores, and it should not say market rate rentals. This is the operating expenses until we can take that property into trust. And you can see in 2024, it's 171,000 because we did a project with the St. Ignace Fire Department where they burned the wooden structures, they burned everything that they could, and now we have out for bid to demo and take away, there's brick there and an old parking lot, so that we can get that all ready for some sort of new construction.
So I have a question about that.
Yes.
Aaron, go ahead.
Just wondering where that is.
Well, that's what I'm wondering too. Me and Rob are just down on the site, and we're just wondering what the timeline is for cleanup, and if there is a plan of what is going to be going there.
We don't have an official plan of what is going to go there yet. The cleanup went out for bids. They did the walkthrough. We didn't get one bid. So it's out for bids again. And our procurement department really went out and solicited, and we believe we're going to get bids for it this time. The Housing Authority doesn't have the level of equipment, or we would have gone in and done it. So it's out for bids, and I believe they're due back in about a week.
So generally, is this going to be like a next spring, next summer job as far as cleanup? Is that what we're presuming?
No, this year.
This year? Okay, good.
Yes, this
Okay.
year. We want it done this year.
Okay.
It's
It's on
just,
US 2. It's that motel, they did a controlled burn with the St. Ignace Fire Department as like an exercise. So it was a motel that we bought that needed to be knocked down. And I think the thoughts were, you know, the St. Ignace Fire Department could use the practice, because if one of our houses burned down on the res, that's going to be the agency that responds, kind of deal. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay. I know where it is.
yeah.
It's
So
right
if
on the
you're
water.
if you're headed toward the hospital, it's on the left-hand side.
Do you know those helicopter tours that they have, Aaron? Pretty much right across from there, in that general area, on the water side.
Has it been thought about to maybe rent the equipment? Would it be more cost effective?
You know what? We've not thought about that. I don't have any staff that would be certified operators in some of that really heavy-duty equipment, but I appreciate that, because that might be something we need to look into.
What about
Or
working
or
with Sault
hire
Ste.
Sutrap Construction and get the equipment.
Yeah,
if we
that's what I was
don't get any bids. Thank you. Page 42 is, it should not say economic, it should say community development project. We don't have a community development project identified yet, but when we're looking at community development, this could be something where we're doing housing for members who don't fit within the NAHASDA guidelines. And so that's what the idea is here.
So I would be supportive of that, but I would like the Housing Authority to remember their mission, which is to provide affordable housing. You know, I'm going to be opposed to economic projects like a car wash, Airbnbs. So as long as we steer clear of those, you know, if we want to build housing for gray area type of people who might just be a little bit above income or something like that, you know, I'm open to that, but not those other things. So that said, there isn't going to be a car wash or Airbnbs this following year, is there?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank
No.
you.
And you're going to see in our strategic plan, when we bring that back, we had a really good session with the commission at the beginning of August, and we're removing those items from the strategic plan.
So related to new housing then, I mean, you know, clearly I'm Unit 5, so I'm representing Unit 5, but when was the last time a new house was put in Marquette?
It would have been, I'm going to tell you, it's only the 10 units
Yep.
that we've done there. Those were being constructed when my son was a baby, so 30 years ago,
Yeah.
honestly.
So I'm just, is there anything in the strategy to address areas like that? Because I'm sure that each of these units has portions of their unit that hasn't been touched. And I'm not asking, you know, I'm not saying every city, but like Munising and Marquette or Wetmore and Marquette are the two primary places people reside. 5.
From when I look at that, Yes, I think what our plan is to start looking at that each year. It's part of our 5-year strategic plan. So looking for maybe property in Marquette, or something of that nature, or maybe there's something that we can purchase and renovate into housing. There is, that would be an eligible thing too. It's not in the plan this year with all of the activities that we have going on.
No, I think you guys are doing a great job. I'm just curious because I grew up a block away actually from the housing. I never lived on the housing, but I lived near it. And it's not changed at all. As a matter of fact, like it would be great. I know we're kind of locked in there, but it's been right on top of a power station my entire life. And like I don't think that's the safest place. I mean, no incidents ever happened, but God knows what could happen. Do you know anything about Superfund sites?
I don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Environmental, probably.
Isaac?
Hey, if you want quick homes there, you know what you could do. No, KI Sawyer, transfer that property to housing, let them finance the remodel.
Okay, Sawyer's not Marquette though.
Yeah, but it's close though.
That's the reason why there hasn't been a lot of development in Marquette, because.
You carved up the unit and you have one unit rep, so the largest city in the Upper Peninsula, which
Know
is
what I'm
also
saying?
the economic hub of the UP, has the fewest representatives.
Maria just mentioned something as well. Our Marquette waiting list is really, really short. We had a unit that sat vacant for quite a few months. We did advertising and things of that nature. It could be because we only have 10 units there. Typically, we have found you build homes and our tribal members show up. So, but we do have a really low waiting list today. Okay, so the next section is our CapEx. And it just outlines what our plans are for next year. So we've got vehicles, we have a vehicle replacement schedule, an equipment replacement schedule that we follow. So you've got all of that in here, along with the low-income housing tax credit project. So you can see, and then a community development project, and a copier. The next section, I'm not going to go over in detail, but I like to include it every year. This is the guidance that we follow in developing the Indian Housing Plan. So this goes into the details of eligible activities, ineligible activities, and so on. And this is a new one that was issued just a year ago. So the board has not seen this one. So I'm not going to go into the details of that. I'm going to skip back to the next section, which is the Nahasda income limits, and I always like to provide that as well. It changes annually, and if you look at page 2 of 4, you can see, I need to take my glasses off. One person can make, a single person can make up to $54,768 and be eligible for tribal housing that's funded through Nahasda. Any questions? No? Okay. So what I'll do then is I will be bringing a resolution back so that we can get this submitted by the deadline.
Okay, I have a couple follow-up questions. I'm not sure if they're included in this plan. So units 2 and 3 are awarding the Housing Authority some of their ARPA dollars and listing you guys as a subrecipient. I'm basically wondering, so I stay in the loop, how much housing that's going to pay for. Like, how much is a typical house costing us right now? And I know it obviously depends, like we build in Odening where there's already infrastructure, it's gonna be, a certain number versus, okay, if we're gonna develop a site, and put in road, infrastructure, utilities, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, how much is it costing us right now?
Can I email you this afternoon?
Yeah.
Because I have those budgets, they're done, they're developed, and then I can give you the details.
Yep, email's fine. Just
Okay.
curious in knowing how much was given to you from each of those units as a subrecipient and how much housing we expect to build with those funds, along with tentative lease dates. I know it's really predicting it and it's asking a lot of you guys. And I don't expect it to be accurate, but just generally like, all right, this is going to construct houses and we're going to be able to get them leased in 26 or 27, just something like that.
Okay. Yep, I sure can.
Okay. All right, final opportunities, questions, comments for Joni on the housing plan? Aaron?
So, all right, so I had a little bit of amnesty or like time off for a while, and I didn't get the phone calls, but as soon as I got elected, I started getting them again. So one of the questions or one of the complaints that I got was individual people that are living in units with no plan for them to migrate out of them. And in one case, I won't give enough detail, but in one case, the person used a disabled family member to qualify, and that person's not residing there. They're living in a assisted living. They're not actually in the unit. So that's one example, but, we have the ongoing example of people living in a 3-bedroom, one person living in a 3-bedroom. Also, many years ago, when those rent increases were going to happen across the board, and we found there were people living in housing that were no longer income eligible. There was supposed to be a transition plan for them to move out. I know of some that are not moved out, and it's some time ago. So is there a plan, do we have an active plan to try to facilitate them getting home buyer training, or even if it's not that, just some kind of counseling or whatever to eventually get them to vacate a unit so that a family can get a unit? Also, I want to say, it's very enriching to me and rewarding to me to hear some of the proposal or some of the ideas that are happening now that I've been asking for many, many years. The apartment complexes, we got in the rut of safe and affordable housing always having to be an individual unit per family, but we have to get more dynamic than that because our housing need is so drastic right now. But anyway, so the idea again was the cascade of the transfer of people that are no longer eligible to live in a 3-bedroom that could potentially move to apartments that could open up 3 bedrooms for families. Is there any targeting or tracking on that?
There is. Did we send the letters out yet, Maria?
No, we just.
Did we just?
the Policy,
Okay.
but those are ready to go.
So here's what's going to happen. And we've talked about this for a number of years. And what has been happening in the past, Maria does probably about 90% of the selection. So as she's looking at the waiting list, she's also looking at the demographics of current housing. Who's in the houses? What are the bedroom size? To see if we've got, say we have we've got elders in a 3-bedroom right now. Can we move that elder to an elder unit, rehab it, put a family in the 3-bedroom? But she's looking at the demographics of the elder waiting list too. It's really unfortunate, but we have elders who are homeless. So instead of moving that elder over into the elder unit, we're housing that homeless elder. So it's on a case-by-case situation right now, and it's looked at every time we do selection. It's good that you brought this up. We are doing letters because the policy was just updated by the Housing Commission, and letters will probably go out within the next 6 weeks or so. But everyone who is living in a unit that is not appropriate for their family size is going to be put on notice. So you may hear about that, and what I'll do is, you will, and what I'll do is I'll give you a heads up by sending you example letters that they're going to receive.
Could we do some articles in the cover paper so that we can get some positive information out there? Because otherwise what's going to happen is we're going to hear a perspective, and it's going to end up be calling your office,
Calling each of you and complaining that it's going to end up at the board table. But the thing is, if you have, this is not heartless. This is more focused on a family, like a young family with kids, And if somebody is living in a unit long past, them needing a 3-bedroom, but the other side of that coin is we have to have someplace they can go too. So, but we do have that though. We do have rental assistance outside of the tribe as well. But I think, have we ever done like an actuary study to see like a projection based on our population, our existing population that's maturing through housing, our market population, census information, and then also we have direct information through our enrollment to get a projection of how many elder units we might need. So, but I guess I went off again, but the issue would be, the main concern would be to get some positive PR put out in advance so we're all on the same page so that it doesn't become housing's evicting, elders.
So, and we've not done that projection, but you know what, that's a really good idea. And we all know Larry Jocks is phenomenal with statistics. So I'll see if I can enlist some help from planning and development with that, so that we do have that piece. And then to go back to those members who are over income, as soon as we find out that they're over income, either through their recertification or they're voluntarily reporting a new income, they're put on notice right away. And I believe we give them 90 days. And what happens after the 90 days, if they can't secure other housing, we do extend it on a month-by-month basis. We don't want to make them homeless, but some of the areas it's difficult to find housing.
Do we, when we give them the notice, I wouldn't say put on notice because that sounds kind of negative, but
Yeah.
when we give them notice, do we reach out to offer to do some like basics, like with credit, kind of like a mini home buyer, curriculum to assist them with, repairing their credit? How do you contact the bank? I have a family member who has a really, really good job at the locks right now, young family, and he got that notice. And initially he was really upset, but then I was like, you make really good money now. You guys make good money. You could live off the res. You could be, you could finance. And then he's like, wow, but my credit, I don't know. I'm not sure. But so I think there's some basic information that we could share with them to kind of coach them so they can see where they are. Because with his income, he's easily going to be able to afford to finance a house. Or, the other question I had was for Odenung. How many more units can we support with the infrastructure?
We have, excuse me. So as we construct new units, we have to put water and sewer infrastructure in. We have exhausted all of the water and sewer infrastructure.
What about the roads? That's what we want to know. How many can we fit up there with the roads? We want to know how many we can cram up there, right, Aaron? Before we have to look at different building sites. So what's the potential in Odenang? How many more units can fit up there?
Can you write that down? I'm gonna, if I can, I'll get you that information. I'll tell you what we're doing. We just wrote another competitive grant through HUD to finish the water and sewer infrastructure, number one, and to add another road in an area so that we can cut those 1 acres in half and better utilize the space. And what we have done as we've been building these 40 units, typically the original layout was 1 acre. We've been able to get 2 houses on each acre, so we're really maximize using the space. But I can get you how many lots that we'll have still available.
Okay, thanks, Joni. You good
absolutely.
at that, Aaron? Okay. Tyler?
So one of the things that you mentioned, people's income limits are rising. There's been some shifts since the pandemic. I know that the federal government hasn't really addressed this. Is there any flexibility internally with us, or are we limited in all of our housing?
Do you mean with the income guidelines? Mm-hmm. We have to stick to these income guidelines.
For all of our housing?
Yes.
Okay. So that's unfortunate. I think that's something that we'll continue to bring up with the government, because I don't think the feds have addressed that at all in the past couple of years. And we're doing wage reviews, and clearly people are making more money. I don't want it to get to the point where they're just like, well, I can't afford to live off the reservation, and I can't afford to really continue working at this job because I'm making too much money to afford to live. It's a really tight boundary for some people. You know, even if it's like a $50 difference, and I know that you don't make the rules. It's something that we have to continue to fight for, at least for tribes, if they're not going to make a nationwide fix.
Tyler, can I provide one? I want to provide one clarification. So we use the 80%. You can go up to 100%. It's a lengthy process, and you have to have HUD approval. You have to prove that there's no other housing. We
No other
looked at it.
affordable housing or no other housing?
No other housing. It's a lengthy process, but I can pull that out and be able to share that with the board at some
Yeah,
point as well.
I would like to see what that process
More
is,
about it?
because if there is something that we can at least attempt, I don't see anything changing in the next few years, you know, where things continue to rise, cost of living continues to rise, people continue to make a few dollars more an hour. Eventually, it's going to plateau, but, you know, even fast food workers, if they're working 2 jobs, they're right on the brink of that, right? You know, and that's just to support their family to get by right now with the increased cost of food, which is why we're seeing, you know, Feeding America so prominently in all of our communities, is because people are needing that supplemental fresh food on top of our USDA program. We talked about, Aaron mentioned, you know, it's great that they have money, you know, that they make an income now to where they can live off reservation. But again, I would like to continue to look at allowing people to purchase plots to continue to live on the reservation. I mean, that's not an overnight fix. That's a 10, 15, 20-year plan. But we've seen it, you know, I know that our next door neighbors there, back about 2014, they drove me around all that land that they have back there, and they've started progressing with people living out there, purchasing their own lots, building their own houses. It would just be something, because maybe some people don't want to live off the land, off of the reservation, because they consider this home.
I will tell you, I was I don't know if I was the resident service manager or the assistant director, and I've been the director now for almost 16 years. We have an entire plan that's approved for tribal members to lease a lot at Odenung. We advertised it, we did everything, where they could go out, they could lease the lot, and they could build their own home. We didn't get any takers. We didn't get any takers at that time.
Right.
But, so
Yeah.
we have developed that.
Okay. Well,
It's
that's unfortunate.
sitting on the shelf.
But as long as it's available, I mean, we should continue. Like, let's see if it's something people want now. The last thing I have is, you'd mentioned about all these grants, and I've recognized that across the board, we've been leaving a lot of grant money on the table because we just do not have the staff to continue to write them. It's a full-time job, right? And I was going to talk to the rest of the board if we had additional time later today, but I've spoken with a few of the board members, and I am pushing forward a resolution to create a grants department under the strategic planning division. I believe it's long time overdue. We need several staff that are just focused on writing grants for this tribe. Your division, all of the divisions. So, you know, hopefully we can get some support. We've heard today how many things are available, how many grants you've applied for. But what we didn't hear is everything that was left on the table because we didn't have the opportunity. We had to choose this instead of this, right? And I think those things, you know, in the future, if this doesn't pass right away, in the future, if I could get your assistance on all the stuff that you actually had to pass up on because you didn't have the capacity to continue to write the grants, I think that would be helpful. But I can only see this helping the tribe in the long run. And I just want to support, you know, the work you guys are doing. And clearly, you just need more. You know, and that's where we're at, right?
Right now in housing, we have one grants manager who's writing all of our grants, and we have a project specialist, but that position is vacant right now. And we're posting for it, but that is our grant writing team right now.
Okay, Aaron.
So that was our dream, and it didn't come to fruition, but it is pretty significant today, different than it was then. I think people couldn't conceive of it when it was just like 1 or 2 rows of houses, and it didn't look inviting necessarily. But we put the infrastructure in, but I hear what you're saying now. We have to, that's an added value or expense. But the one thing that we have not done is package it like, why would you want to come there? And the reason, the selling points are you won't have to pay property taxes. We have city water and sewer, although remember how controversial that was. And you will be in the covered area, so you don't have to pay state income tax. So there's a pretty big value for it, and maybe it's a matter of marketing it to retirees. So I think it might be worth repackaging like a big plan. Right after World War II, for a period of like maybe 10 years, we were in a boom. That's where all the babies came, right? The baby boom. And what people did for development is they had these marketing plans that made it so attractive. We have something really attractive for people that would want to live at Odenong. And now that Odenong has got so many units and it's so much bigger than when we first conceived of that, I think it's also like an attractive draw now. So it might be time to do that, but the downside is we'd have to figure out how to cover the infrastructure. But I think, depending on how this election goes, there might be a wave of housing infrastructure funds and sanitation funds and water and sewer funds that are coming. But it really kind of depends on who wins the election, so.
Well, the other downside would be if I build a house on Odenang, who can I sell it to if I no longer want to live there?
You have to sell it to a tribal member.
Right, which there's fewer of than the general population, so there's fewer people who'd be eligible to buy my place, you know? I think that's the downside, and a lot of people, you know, they don't want to build a house on land that isn't theirs, even if it's a long-term lease. You know, I know Bay Mills does that a lot, though, and they have pretty good luck with that. But, yeah, for better or worse, it hasn't been utilized for us. Isaac?
Yeah, I think we went through this and banks don't really want to loan you money to trust land because if they don't pay, then what do? They're out the money. So
We
I
did
can
meet-
see where that's a huge obstacle.
Right. We can revisit that if we pull it off the shelf and dust it off. And because we had MOUs done, we met with banks, we met with local lenders. And so, because what they want is they want it secured. They
Yeah.
want to know that if that mortgage is defaulted on, that the tribe is going to come in.
Yeah, and I
They want
believe
that
we just
security.
went through that process with one bank. So I think there's only one financial institution in Sault Ste. Marie that'll lend money, and I don't know if they will do it anymore, but.
Yeah, Aaron did make a good point. There are financial incentives. You don't have to pay property tax on it. You're in the tax exempt area, so it might be a good fit for some people. But Aaron, while you're off, we had a situation where a bank lent an individual some money to purchase a house from the tribe. They stopped making their bank payment, and then the board dragged their feet at evicting them, you know? Like, they went a year without collecting anything, so that's what Isaac was referring to. Yep.
You have to move that out to an authority so that it doesn't become a political decision. The thing is, if they're eyes wide open when they enter the agreement, you know, but we might also provide some connecting service between who's leaving and helping somebody else that would like to, because they can sell it to another tribal member. We could provide that additional level of service to connect those two.
Isaac?
Yeah, but can we do that like with people that currently own homes, right? What if they gave the land that the home sits on to the housing commission and then leased it back through a long-term lease?
That's actually the mechanism to convey a home, is the land lease. And it doesn't come through the Housing Commission, it comes through the board. The board approves those land leases. But that's the mechanism that we have in place to convey a home, either when the member pays it off,
Yeah,
or if they
which-
want to sell it to someone else.
Which I understand, but like my home that I have, right? If I gave that somehow to the tribe, it got put in the trust, and then I leased it back for 99 years, I'm wondering.
Do you mean your individual home?
Yep,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
A lot of hypotheticals we can work through, but I appreciate you guys coming in and presenting on the housing plan. You know, it looks good in my opinion. So I look forward to voting on it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much today.
Thank you. You guys want to do 5 minutes and then finish the last item? All right, let's do a 5-minute break. We'll get back in here at 3:35 and then we'll cover Josh's last item. All right, guys, let's go ahead and have a seat. We're on our last item, and then we're off for the day.
Oh, and Becky's gonna be on her way for you.
All right, Josh, whenever you're all set.
So recently, it was brought to light that there hasn't been a consistent use of how to apply using the intellectual property of the tribe. So legal has been working on developing a manual for the use of the intellectual property, and we're going to go through that today and kind of look for board feedback on any modifications that might be needed to this manual. The intellectual property of the tribe includes all tribal logos, copyrights, trademarks, and service marks. The tribe has an interest in protecting its intellectual property rights. For external use of intellectual property, no person or company may use the intellectual property of the tribe without the express written permission of the tribe through a resolution of the board of directors. That resolution must contain the following information: the name of the party to whom permission is being granted, the specific use of the intellectual property for which the party is seeking to use it, any size specifications on the use of the intellectual property if applicable, and the expiration of the use of the intellectual property, including the option to request an extension of the deadline through an additional resolution. Internal use of intellectual property. All tribal departments, committees, and events are authorized to utilize the intellectual property of the tribe to promote their department, committee, or event. Intellectual property placement on letterhead, envelopes, business card, nameplates, vehicles, and signs must comply with placement requirements in the December 1st, 1993 Tribal Mark and Identification System. If a department or committee or event wishes to give away or sell merchandise, they are authorized to use the intellectual property for the following items without needing approval from the board of directors. Any designs, including the name, anything besides the intellectual property, department, committee, or event name will be neither reviewed and approved by the executive director. Right now, the executive director is there as a placeholder, and we're looking for board direction on who they would want to review these items. And they would be reviewing it to ensure it aligns with the values of the tribe. If an item is denied by the executive director, an item can be brought to the board of directors for approval. If the item is not included on this list, it will require approval from the board of directors for use. And on this list, we have shirts, hats, mugs and cups, bags, pens, fidget items, stress relievers, lip balm, koozies, towels, sticky pads, hand sanitizer, magnetic clips, magnets, keychains, balloons, golf tees, notebooks, mouse pads, frisbees, phone/tablet stands, and pop sockets. Use of intellectual property related to 2% and cultural enhancement funding. The use of tribal intellectual property is allowed for projects involving 2% funding and cultural enhancement funding. Any use related to 2% funding or cultural enhancement funding will need to be reviewed and approved by the executive director to ensure it aligns with the values of the tribe. If denied by the executive director, an item can be brought to the board of directors for approval. Use of Quaidin and intellectual property. Quaidin is authorized to use its intellectual property for promotion as it sees fit. Any use of Quaidin intellectual property as external sponsorship, external promotion of an event at the casino, or internal use within the tribe must be approved by the Quaidin CEO. The Quaidin Gaming Authority must approve any external party looking to use Quaidin intellectual property. And the unauthorized use of intellectual property. Any party found to be using the intellectual property of the tribe without authorization or outside the scope of their authorization will receive a cease and desist letter from the tribal legal department. Are there any questions on this manual?
Any questions on this, guys? Rob?
Just the part that authorizes departments or committees to sell merchandise with our logo. I would like to see a provision that mandates that the spending of the funds raised by the sales of those items are strictly tied to the, either the mission or the purpose of that department. Because what I wouldn't want to see is that sometime down the road, either a department or committee starts selling these with the intent to donate the money to something else outside of the scope of benefiting the members directly tied to that department or mission. Does that make sense?
Yes, we can work on incorporating that language into.
So just that way, maybe even something that says whatever department is in charge of selling those also must spend, and it must be tied to the exact nature of whatever they were fundraising for. I just don't want to see too much leniency with that part. Because it would be, I mean, we have enough departments and committees to where it could get out of our control.
So Josh, as long as there's no objection from the board, would you mind adding name placards to the list of items? Just because when we go to different conferences and whatnot, if we could have something like that, you know, represent us, I think that would be good as well. That's a recommendation coming from Lana. Yeah. Any objection to that, guys? Okay, it's an easy one. Josh, do you have something to add?
I would suggest doing lanyards as well.
Lanyards as well? Okay, let's get lanyards on there as well. Okay, thanks, Josh.
I don't know.
Good, Tyler.
I have a question. So why are we being so specific?
The reason that specific items were listed is so that if there's any items that the tribe would not want their logo on, that ensures it gets reviewed without just having the broad authority. So it gives the broad authority for these items. So if there's something that would not go against the beliefs of the tribe in a department or committee or event wanted to put the logo on
so
that.
this is what I mean by specific. Number 1 is shirt, number 2 is hats. What about sweatshirt, jacket, t-shirt, long sleeve shirt?
Seems like we could change all those items to just clothing, right,
Yeah.
Josh? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And there's, I don't know, I feel like we could be a little more broad on some of these ones.
Could you give us some thought, Josh? Just based on what Tyler suggested? Okay.
Yeah.
Aaron?
All right, so I'm old enough that I was here. I was actually an intern at the time when the design center designed our crane logo. And so this doesn't change the policy that's already in place for the use of it. Is that correct?
No, that is incorporated into this. That
Okay.
requires.
Because the one thing that over the
placements.
years that's happened is some departments have just took it upon themselves to use the crane logo, but then to kind of change it up or whatever, which violates the policy, because the tribe wants to keep the integrity of that design and not have it, you know, not have it, the color specification, the PDF size, all of that is governed by that agreement by the design center. And by the way, college students designed our crane logo. Remember those guys? Yeah. Carrie, Brenda Pluta was the faculty advisor.
Okay. Tyler has one more question or comment.
So I see you got the use of intellectual property related to 2% in cultural enhancement funding. So I think that's a bonus. And does that supersede the external use of intellectual property for the bullets 1, 2, 3, and 4? So it does not have to come back to the board for 2% in cultural use funding?
Correct.
Okay.
Gives the staff the ability to use that.
That's what we were asking for.
Anything else to cover on this, Josh?
I guess the only other item I'd be looking for direction on is who the board would want to establish as the person for reviewing these requests in the tribe.
Any suggestion, guys?
Already have built in it, the executive director.
What were you saying, Aaron? I
You
couldn't
have
hear
it built in it, you just mentioned the executive director reviews it, right?
Yeah, that was put in as a placeholder to see
Oh.
who the board wanted to designate.
It's ministerial, so it could be placed wherever.
It's not going to be a heavy lift for anyone. I mean, in most cases, it's going to be black and white. Yeah. Who do you guys want?
Oh, Aaron raised his hand.
Aaron?
Josh or something.
Switch executive director with Josh Elliott? Yeah? You guys okay with that?
You open your mouth, Josh.
Well, it's been legal who sent me the threatening letters when I was out of office.
Who do you guys want, for real? Legal. Legal? Switch it to legal, and then if it needs to be changed, we will. So it's not going to be a lot of work for you guys. So if you could switch it to that, Josh, we'd appreciate it.
Yep, I can get that done.
Can I do Pokemon cards?
All right, guys, so that's all the items that we have for today. The weather's still fine. All right, guys. So workshop adjourned, guys. See you guys later.